Grief is one of those things that just latches onto a person. It's this invisible burden that starts to affect everything around you. It finds its way into your relationships. It affects your sleep. And it affects your ability to do things that you wouldn't have thought twice about before. It's one of those things that leaves you unsure of how to go on with your life. If you were here for our last episode with our guest Hannah Wachter, you know that grief comes to us from all sorts of experiences. It can come from losing your job or a fight with a family member, or from losing someone you care about. And when we bring our grief to church, we're often met with people and voices that only make things worse for us. But as we've built this show, it's been important to us that we don't just talk about the problems. We also want to share ideas for solutions. That's what this second part episode is all about. As a grief recovery coach, Hannah Wachter walks people through their grief and helps them find hope again. She'll share ideas on how to connect with grieving people and some of the most helpful things she's learned about how to show love and support in ways that people can really feel and understand. We'll cover all that and more today on Bridges Over Walls.
I call it pain to purpose because I grew up in an abusive home and I made a decision then as well. Like, I'm not going to be an abuser. I'm not going to hurt people the way that I've been hurt. Not only am I not going to hurt people, I'm going to pursue healing people that have been hurt like that. I don't want anybody to feel the way that I felt. So that's primarily what I do through like my life coaching work. And then this just fit so well because it was that same experience of like taking the things that were painful for me and then purposing to help other people so that they didn't have to have those painful experiences or just being that soft landing place for somebody else. I have learned though that I am still grieving myself and I have to make space for that. I have to honor my own grief. I have to have really good boundaries, set limits for myself of how much I take on and who I take on. I think that actually has been the hardest thing for me is also being like, okay, Hannah, but it's only been a year. And, you need to give yourself space and time. You need to be gentle with yourself as you're going through this process. It's wonderful that you help other people, but you also cannot help them if you are not in a good place yourself, or if you've got things that you still haven't processed. And so I'm constantly kind of checking in with myself about that too, and my own readiness. Is there stuff unprocessed, or am I distracted in my own pain? And with that, I'll kind of pull back my client load or whatever. Thankfully, though, for me, working with people who are grieving is actually very joyful work for me. Believe it or not, it's surprising, but it gives me a lot of energy. And I think that's a way that I know that I'm operating in what God wants me to do, because it gives me life. It gives me joy to hold them out when they're crying, and give them a hug. It gives me joy that they finally have a space where they can let some of these things out that they've never said to anybody before. It gives me joy when they make discoveries about themselves through the process that we go through of honoring their losses in life. Those are such victories, because then I know that they're going to go out and be healthier people and help heal other people now that they have a greater understanding of themselves. And so that is so inspiring and life-giving to me. However, I also know that I have to be really mindful of how much I can give and when I can give it as I continue to go through my own grief journey.
What does the process look like? Say that somebody has gone through something. Recovery seems like to trivialize, like, let's get them out of grief. You know what I mean? So I'm struggling with how to phrase this, but when somebody comes to you for help, as they're going through these things, what does that process look like? Like, what's the first thought that you have, the first step that you take with people, and what does that kind of process that you guys go through together look like, just on a practical level?
So the first thing I do with people is just meet with them and, have a little connection call is what I call it. But just tell me why you're here. What are you grieving? And let me listen to you. Let me hear your story. I share a little bit of my story first because, again, with people and grief, we're very we're guarded. And so they've never met me. They don't know. And so I share vulnerably first to say, hey, it's okay. I'm going to share some of the things, some of my own griefs.
Yeah.
And now if you're willing, I'd love to hear why you're here and what you're grieving and what you're going through. And then I just listen. But I also tell people, like, imagine your life is like a garden, and every relationship of your life represents a part of your garden, or, you know, every career or whatever represents an area. And, you know, when that thing or person or life comes to an end, that part of your garden dies. And society says, okay, well, forget that part of your garden.
Yeah.
Right. But then what happens to dead parts of gardens? Like weeds grow, and infestation happens. And those weeds don't just stay to that one part. They go to the other parts of your garden that are beautiful and healthy. So now you have some weeds over here and over there. And what I do is I come along as a gardener and I say, hey, let's go look outside at your garden. Yeah. Let's look at this dead part. Yep. Let's pull up all the weeds. Yeah. Let's put some fertilizer here. Let's water it. Let's love on this part of your garden. And as we do that, the weeds over here are starting to die. This part of your life grows back beautiful and whole again. And you have just this beautiful garden that you can look at. I know what you mean when you're saying like you struggle with the word recovery a little bit, because, and I always tell people, it's like, you're not going to, going through this process is not going to mean that you're going to forget your person, that you're not going to miss that thing or person that you lost. That's not it. What happens for grievers a lot is that we just get stuck on all the things that we never got to experience or say or share in with that person, and we ruminate over them. And so part of the process is just really working on those unsaid things, those unmet dreams, hopes, and expectations, really looking at those things and finding peace with those things, laying those things down so you can go back to like all the beautiful memories and all the joyful things that you had with that person or thing. I walk them basically through a 7-week process. And there's a book that goes along with it called the Grief Recovery Method Handbook. And the first 2 weeks are focused on myths around grief, coping mechanisms around grief, something we call short-term energy relieving behaviors. So, you know, I don't really want to deal with my grief, so I'm going to work obsessively kind of thing. Or I'm going to compulsively shop, or maybe it's drinking, maybe it's drugs. I don't know. What are the things that you're running to in place of processing? Those things, some of those things aren't even necessarily bad. I love to shop, but are we shopping to avoid? That's the question, right? So we spend the first 2 weeks just really letting them talk, like, and giving them the opportunity to tell me, well, what are things that people have said to you that have been really hurtful? Like, I just let people like get it all out. Because I do think a lot of grievers come angry and hurt and frustrated because no one in their community is understanding them and their experience. And so I try to just be a heart with ears and no mouth, and like no judgment. I'm just loving you and I'm just listening to you. Grief brain is a real thing. You just move slower. Your thinking isn't as fast. Like decision making is a lot harder. And in the 3rd week, we start to work on something called a loss history graph. So literally someone will chart all the losses they've had in their life from like beginning of their life to current day. It's interesting because it can be a wide variety of things. One of the things on my loss history graph is when my mom told me that she wouldn't let me audition for the Mickey Mouse Club at 6. And I was like really devastated by that, because I was like, Mom, I can do this. Like I am made for the Mickey Mouse Club. But my little 6-year-old self like was really sad about that. So that's on my loss history graph. But then I also have, you know, several instances of abuse in my life on my loss history graph. Some moments where the police came and arrested my dad on my loss history graph. I have moving from Washington, D.C. to Portland on my loss history graph. I have a fight I had with one of my brothers on there that was really, really hard for me, and for years caused me to have a really strained relationship with him. I have a miscarriage on there. I also left a company for ethical reasons. That was really hard for me. Lots of grief around that. At the time, I probably wouldn't have called it grief, but going through this process kind of really helped me see, like, no, I was grieving that. And I was grieving the fact that I thought I was going to be on this career path with this company, and then they turned out to be awful people,
Yep.
and that's not going to happen now.
Yep.
So it's a wide variety of things that are on this. But what we're trying to do is help people honor the things that they have lost.
Yeah.
And see it.
Yep.
And it's just honoring your life.
Yeah.
And all the things that actually have made you you, because all of these defining moments of loss have really are part of the composite or the tapestry of who we are. And and they inform the decisions we make, whether we realize it or not. Because a lot of times we're like, oh, that thing happened, and we kind of like write it off. And yeah, I was sad about it or something, but we don't actually realize what we were really feeling was grief about it. And we were really just feeling the loss or that change in a pattern of behavior that we were really familiar with. And so it's just getting that person to see their life from a different angle.
Yep.
And to honor each of those losses. Because we want to make space for all of the things that we felt sad about, even Mickey Mouse Club, miscarriage, whatever, moving, job change, whatever. We want to honor all of that because all of that like frees us up then to have greater space for other things that we're made to do. So we do that. Then we choose one of those data points, one of those events, and we focus in on that one.
Yeah.
And it's usually the one that's causing the most pain. It's usually the one that people are coming to me for in the first place.
Yep.
And I also always tell people, because I'll have a lot of friends be like, oh, my so-and-so, my best friend's dad died, and I really want her to talk to you. What should I do? How do I tell her to come talk to you?
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, you don't.
Right.
Like, don't do that, please. Like, let her, you can share like a post of mine, or you can just like whatever, but like, she needs to come when she's ready, when she wants to talk about it.
Right.
I don't want to, it's so hard to work with somebody in their grief if they are not ready to process or talk about it or whatever. So that's really important. But we choose one of those data points and then we create something called a relationship graph. So you zoom in kind of on that one thing or one person. There's usually, so we kind of like draw a line down the middle of the page. There's things above the line and things below the line, because we don't want to, especially with people, we talk about enshrining or bedeviling. So we don't want to be like, my mom was perfect. She never made me upset ever, or like, it would be very easy for me to talk about my dad who died, like, and be like, well, he was evil. He was abusive. He was only these things. He never did anything good. That's not true either. Yeah. We want to have things like above and below the line. Things below the line end up being stuff that we either want to apologize for or we need to forgive. Things above the line are something that we call significant emotional statements. Just things Mom, oh my gosh, when I was 4 and you gave me that purse with a set of keys and a little plastic credit card, like that brought me so much joy because I wanted to be like you. Yeah. And I felt like I was like the queen of the world. Mom, that time when the boy at school told me my skin was like dirt and it was like my first racist comment ever, basically, but she talked me through it and then told me that I was made in God's image and that I was perfect. I'd never actually gone back and told my mom how much that meant to me. Yeah. And so it's stuff like that you just never got a chance to say, but you just really need to express. We basically spend the following 2 weeks after that, the final 2 weeks of the process, turning that into a letter. Yeah. And something we call a completion letter. And in that letter, you get the opportunity to say, Mom, sometimes when I wanted to just talk to you about stuff and you would get passive aggressive, that was really hard for me. And I want you to know I forgive you. Yeah. All the things that we carry inside of us that we also wonder like, oh, well, did they know? Were they mad at me? Grievers feel a lot of guilt for things that they shouldn't feel guilty for. Yeah. We spend a lot of time unpacking that too. Being really careful about, okay, what's mine to own and what's not mine to own. Once we kind of get clarity on what we want to apologize for, what we need to forgive, what we just want to say, we turn it into a letter. Yep. They read the letter to me and we don't process what they wrote either. Yeah. We don't go back and like pick it apart, because it's what you wrote and it's good and it's beautiful. And then we're essentially done. And if they want to work on another thing on their loss history graph, we can. I teach them a little bit of a process called a PS letter. So if there's something else that you realize that you wanted to say or you need to forgive, I kind of give them that tool. Yeah. Because also the reality is like we can get triggered by something or have a new realization of like, oh, actually, I'm still thinking about that one thing. I really need to get that off my chest.
Yeah.
But it's really just helping people move through those unmet dreams, those unmet hopes, those unmet expectations, or say the things that they never got an opportunity to say, or maybe they did say, but they felt like they weren't heard. And I just really get to be this witness for that and hold that for them and say, you have said this now.
Yeah.
Now you can lay it down.
Yep.
Just lay it down. Don't go back to it. It's a very simple process, but it is a very powerful process. When my mom died, we had spent a Christmas before that together, and it was the worst Christmas I've ever had with her ever. Yeah. We got into this massive fight. Then I got COVID. Then she got COVID from me. It was like this horrible, it was awful. It was awful. And I had a lot of guilt around giving her COVID and this fight. So I went through the grief recovery method myself before I even got certified, and I wanted to do it on my mom. Yeah. And I did that process with her. And this past Christmas, this first Christmas afterwards, I kind of had this moment of like, oh my gosh, I didn't even think about it. I didn't think about the fight. I didn't think about COVID. I didn't think about any of those things because I had done my work around them. Yeah. And then I was able to lay them down and let them go. It's just really identifying those things that we have a lot of emotional charge around. Yep. We don't even maybe know why we have a lot of emotional charge around it, but it's really like kind of probing into those things and saying, okay, is this just... do you need to apologize? Do you feel like you want to apologize about this? Do you want to forgive this? Do you need to, like, what do you need to say here?
You know, I don't know if this is healthy or not, but especially in times where I haven't had or haven't felt like I had the money for therapy. Yeah. One of the ways that I process my life is I'm very analytical about media. And that's from kind of a writing background, but also through movies. And, you know, as we've been talking, weirdly, when I think about grief and things that have meant a lot to me in ways that have got me thinking about my own life, there's like a couple of Marvel things that come to mind.
Yes.
So I remember when WandaVision came out, right? Yeah. And for me, I grew up for 12 years of my life from the ages of about 6 to 18. I was in an abusive environment as well, psychologically abusive, which can be really hard to talk about because people think of sexual abuse, they think of physical abuse, they think of verbal abuse. But when it comes to things like sleep deprivation, for example, or not being allowed to use the bathroom as punishment or weird things like that, like it can be really hard to find the right space to process those things. And even within therapists, there are certain people who have a better grasp of what you're saying than others. And so, you know, often in my life, I've been put in these positions where I'm kind of figuring out how to process a lot. Yeah. And I remember when WandaVision came out, seeing this character deal with the fallout of their trauma and in a messy way, like where they're not being good about it. They're literally holding all the people around them hostage in their grief. And you can see, I mean, just the struggle there as the main character, Wanda, fights with the loss of her you know, partner and everything. And why I connected so well with that is, grief, it affects you in so many ways. And at the different steps of your journey, you can look back and see like, oh, I caused damage in how I was processing this, right? And there can be a lot of guilt and shame around like, I don't like who I was to you because of what happened to me. And even if what happened to me was not my fault, there's a lot of fallout that's come from this. Yeah. Being able to involve myself in media and take in media where it can point to real things in my life and I can kind of work through like, wow, that's from the outside, that looks really horrible. I wonder if there's any similarities here. Yeah. You know? And I remember breaking out crying just for the, you know, cheesiest cliche line, I'm sure like everybody knows, but what is grief if not love persevering? Right. And it just humanized so much for me where it's like grief isn't just being sad. Grief is having loved and lost. Grief is when something meaningful to you was destroyed or damaged and something that you gave your whole heart to. And it doesn't matter what it looks like to everybody else, but to you, it was important. And something has disrupted, changed, corrupted that. And just recently, my family went and watched Guardians of the Galaxy 3.
Oh, it's
And, there's just, I don't want to summarize the movie. I know not everybody likes Marvel movies, but when you're able to see the backstory of a character that went through so much, and you've only known them as comic relief.
Yeah.
But you get the backstory of their life and all of the pain that they've been through, and the forging of a character that becomes joy to be around, that becomes support for a team, and the found family that they finally find safety and rest and love in. To me, it was just the most beautiful thing. And I just bawled my eyes out in the theater with my family.
I love it.
Because to me, it was not just the story of pain, but it was the story of finding safety and healing. It was the story of finding those people that you can really rely on in your messiness. And really, that's what I want it to be, an analogy for church.
Yeah.
I want church to be a place where you don't have to be related to people.
Yeah.
You don't have to have been, established there, but you can find family. And not just family like they're controlling what you do, but family like in the best way.
Yeah.
Like the people who have your back, and that you're going to make mistakes and you're going to hurt feelings and you're going to work through those things.
Yeah.
And you're not just out on the street after that,
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I think it's important to me that we have media that reflects our human experience.
Oh, absolutely.
And that we're able to participate in stories. And see ourselves in aspects of them and process what we want for our lives through them.
Yes.
Is there any media that stood out to you in your experience that kind of connected?
Oh, that's good. That's a good question. I do love me some Marvel movies. Probably some songs.
Okay.
Some music.
Because you're a music person.
Yeah. That really, for me, were anchor points and really helped ground me. There's a song by Maverick City Music, and it's called Joy of the Lord.
Yeah.
I first heard the song the week of my mom's funeral, and I just remember like falling to my knees hearing it, because I was like, this is my experience. This is exactly what I'm trying to do right now. And the words were, I'm pulling on joy from heaven's reserve. It has stores of enough for every season I've served. I'm seeing beyond my circumstance. This joy that I have is my inheritance. And then, joy, this is the joy of the Lord. And then the next verse is, there is a Savior in the valley place. He's walking beside me and he knows my pain. He is God, the beginning and the end. God right there in the midst of it. And then joy of the Lord. And I felt like that is it for me. Like I am in a valley.
Yeah.
And yet I know that God is right here with me. He is not disappointed in me for having my heart broken. He is not mad. He is not whatever narrative of, we create some twisted narratives around who God is and how he perceives us. And I just was like, he is with me in this. He's crying alongside me.
Yeah.
Because here's the reality is this, like death was never his intention for us.
Yeah.
Like he did not intend death. He did not want that. He wanted relationship. He wanted fellowship and walking alongside us and loving us and eternal love. But then death is the consequences of what we chose to do. And so now this is part of our world. And I just remember thinking, you hate this too.
Yeah.
You hate death too.
Yeah.
And that's why you sent your son. And that's why he holds the keys to death now. And what a hope I have. And this is actually the joy of the Lord. Like in a very ironic sense, I had like the deepest joy in my faith through one of the most difficult experiences of my entire life.
Yeah.
Just getting true clarity on who God is and his character and his heart towards me. That was incredible. So for me, that song, I was like, this is my experience.
Yeah.
And I am going to pull on joy from heaven, because I don't have it here right now. But I know that if I pray and ask for God to just rain down on me what I need, he will answer. He will do it. And so for me, that song was really powerful for me during that season.
Yeah, I think so often we don't understand like the magnitude of what people are going through, and there's always details that they shouldn't need to share with us. One of the things that we don't think about is like the physical and psychological effects of going through this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like during my worst times, I was sleeping something like 2.5 or 3 hours a night for weeks on end.
Mm-hmm.
And so the toll that takes on your body and your mind, and the irritability and the just feeling that your whole body is being pulled down into the floor everywhere you go. And then you're expected to hold a conversation, about normal stuff and appear like, I'm totally okay to handle my tasks. Please don't fire me. I have bills. Like
exactly.
all of that.
I got this.
But the other thing is people go through things that they aren't able to share. I remember there was a period of time where I was just really, really going through something and I couldn't share because it wasn't my story to tell.
Yes.
But it affected my life very directly.
Yes.
And at the time, I was on a very regular speaking circuit. I was flying all over the country. Minimum once a month, I was out of state speaking in church environments. And so many times, like I remember traveling out to a place I'd never been alone, right? To people that I didn't know super well, and just like crying in my car, just like in the hour leading up to when I was supposed to be on stage, like where you're just like trying to clean up puffy eyes, and you're like, oh my goodness, they're going to think like I'm not mentally able to handle this or whatever. And suddenly you have to put on your speaker face, and communicate. And what's been so hard in the time since is when I talk about this, people who were there will be like, oh, you seemed fine. And it's like, I did a really good job pretending. For my survival, I had to do so. You imagine going to TED Talks. And you're sitting there and the person walks out, looks at you and just breaks down crying. Like we are not in an environment that enables people to really fully be themselves in those things. You really have to be that dynamic speaker. You really have to be the person who's ready and prepared and stable, right? But the truth is that humans go through all kinds of things all the time. And we are seeing a prepared version when they go up on stage, and we expect to.
Exactly.
Yep. And so I think, if I could paint the ideal picture of my church family at the time, how I could have felt helped and how I did in the ways that in the people who did it right. The people who did it right during my grieving process were the people who reached out to me individually, no strings attached, and just said, hey, at whatever level you need, I'm here. I don't need to know all the details, but I love you.
That's right.
And one of my closest friends, it just meant, hey, I have a spare room in my house and you can go be there as long as you want. You don't have to come out to eat with me. You don't have to nothing. If you need a place to just get away from noise and people bothering you, you can shut off your phone. And here's when I'll be home. Here's when I go to work, and you can just have a key to my house and just go there wherever you need. And that meant the world to me. To just have space that wasn't around people, and if I could build, a church environment for grieving people and how we react and just plan and program it all out. It would be that. It would be that our heart is, we're here when you need us in the ways that you need us.
That's right.
And we're not going to add pressure or commentary other than that.
That's right. That's right.
As you were going through your grief, what did you need?
Similarly, I needed spaces. I needed safe spaces. I needed people to say, you can just come as you are. So my kickboxing studio was really especially in the first few months of my mom dying, it was my safe space. In that way, it was like my church, because it was a place where I could show up. I could do my own thing, right? No one needed me to do anything or be anything. And it was always met with, if you want to just be on the mat and cry, like, that's great. If you want to just punch the heck out of the bag, do that. Like, wherever you're at is fine, and no one's going to bother you. And I loved that. I had the permission to just be me and wherever I was, and it was okay. And I was, just met with hugs and love, and if you need anything, let me know. And other than that, no pressure. Like, and I just really think that, like you said, no strings attached, no pressure, just that free permission.
Yeah.
If you need me, I'm here, but like, hey, do your thing.
Yep.
That is such a relief to the griever. That was such a relief to me at that time, having people just let me be where I'm at and just be like, yeah, it's fine. And if you need something, I'm here. Otherwise, it's okay. And you go at your own pace, like, and no judgment. I feel like that is another big thing too. It's just really reassuring that person. And for me at that time, just being really reassured that there was no judgment. And I sought out those relationships and those people that I knew already from past experiences with them, that there was no judgment.
Yeah.
And I was safe. I could show up crying, messy, no makeup, whatever. It didn't matter, because I was going to be taken exactly where I was and not even have like no second thought of like, oh, well, you should have been, none of that. Just the freedom. That's just so peaceful. That's like, to me, that's like just total rest, where you can be in a space or with a person and you're going to be okay. There's no judgment.